Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Salam Media. You now joined us for the final segment, the one that many were excited for. Car Talk, it is indeed. We're going to be joined by Adam Ford in just a bit, and he's going to be telling us exactly why cars in South Africa are so expensive. Um, it's quite shocking. If you just compare the VW hatchback in 2016, it was costing around 389,000 rand in the United States, in South Africa, compared to in the United States, where it was costing 206,000 rand, and if you take it over to Brazil, I mean, 174,000. These stats are according to Telegraph, and it's quite shocking. Just to see why exactly we're paying this much for cars. I mean, I'm sure the youth out there would like to own their own cars and not be paying it off for the rest of their lives. We're joined by Adam Ford, our favorite motoring journalist, who's going to be telling us all about this and why exactly we're paying so much. Adam, good evening. Thank you so much
Oh,
for joining us.
good evening, Thakir. Thank you very much for the time to join you on this Friday night.
It's always interesting chatting to you. You're always unlocking different parts of our brains and making us think a bit further. This evening, another topic that has come up, and another one that will be mind-boggling to many listeners and viewers out there. Why are cars so expensive in South Africa?
Well, it's because our government is ripping us off, and that's the simple term of it. 42% approximately of a price of a car ranging in between the price of 200 to 900,000 rand. That's where most of the cars are sold. 42% is tax. Wow, that's a lot. So you said in your preamble there, cars in America are a lot cheaper. In other parts of the world are a lot cheaper, and it's because they're not paying those huge duties. So we've got to remember that a lot of the vehicles that are we sell in South Africa are imported. So you take all the Korean cars, most of the Japanese cars, besides some of the Toyotas, which are manufactured here locally, are subject to huge tax. So you've got, of course, import tax.
Mm.
We've obviously got the rand dollar exchange rate or whatever they're paying for where the cars are coming for, if they're buying them in euros or dollars. So that exchange rate affects the price of the car. We have ad valorem tax added. Of course, we've got the 15% VAT on top of it. We've got a CO2 tax. Where's that money gone? I'd love to know the billions that we have been paying on every time you buy a car. And some of those, can add to 30 to 50,000 rand to the price of a car. So any car that's your emissions over 120 grams, you're paying tax on it. So obviously some of the smaller, more fuel efficient cars, they're not subject to the CO2 tax. But anything that's chewing more than 120 grams per kilometer, we are paying at a CO2 tax on it. And it can be very expensive. That adds onto that, of course. Now,
But it's very
even though,
mind-boggling
beg your
if you
pardon?
think of it. It's very mind-boggling because if you think of it, your smaller cars and the ones that doesn't have such a massive CO2 emission are
Yeah.
actually manufactured in South Africa. Because if you look at majority of Toyota's cars, um, they fuel efficient and something that your town runners that you'd be looking to go with. Um, where's that
Yeah.
money going to?
Well, this is a very, very good question. It's all fair enough saying, well, we're going to put tax on imported vehicles to protect the local industry and keep people employed and so forth, but do something with that money. I'd love
Mm,
for somebody to go to government and audit that CO2 tax, as an example, and say, where has this money been? Because it's not ring fenced. And it's not like, okay, we're going to take this, and it's supposed to be put back into the environment because that's what the CO2 tax is, to protect our environment. Are they actually spending that money wisely? And well, we all know the answer. No, it hasn't. It's the same story with the plastic bag tax. It hasn't gone to where it's supposed to go. There's also taxes on tires. I'm sure we've seen all the scandals revolve around used tires. Those tires are supposed to be responsibly disposed of, recycled. There's a tax on it. That money is supposed to go to all those recycling projects, but it just doesn't happen. And that is the big problem. And that's what makes the cars so expensive. And of course, even the locally produced cars, there's a tremendous amount of imported components in it. There's some local content. But of course, I mean, any car that manufactured locally, we do not produce the engines. I think Volkswagen produced a couple of engines for the Polo Vivos, and Ford produced some engines for some of the Ranger Buckies. But other than that, all those engines, and those are in gearboxes, those are very expensive components that are coming into the country that are getting um, duties and taxes put onto them, and that's what all pushes the price of cars up. And this is really putting cars now out of the hands of the average man in the street. I mean, if you look at a reasonable SUV now, which is a very popular segment of cars, I'm not talking about entry level stuff, mid range, something
mm,
like Mazda. Recently, I was at the launch of the new Mazda CX30, a very impressive car, but it's 4 to 500,000 rand. And if you look at it and say, well, for every 100,000 rand that you finance, it's approximately 2,000 rand a month. That's 8,000 to 9,000 rand a month if you're not buying a car with a residual or no deposits and no trading. That's a lot of money to come out of your pocket after tax. So really, I don't know how, especially in this economy with COVID and the economy is not flying at all, how people afford new cars is beyond me. Really, I suppose you've got to have some of those clever finance packages where you get big fat residuals and you can pay for the rest of your life, which is something we try not to encourage people to do because
mm,
inevitably what happens is they finance a car with a 40% residual. Cool, I've got the GTI instead of the Polo Vivo. Now I've got a GTI, and in 6, 7 years' time, they've got a 40% residual to go pay. Oh, well, let me refinance it again. So you're stuck with the
mm.
vehicle 10 years if you're going to finance it till it's paid fully.
It's quite crazy. I mean, it has a ripple effect if you look at it with cars being this expensive in South Africa. Obviously, we do know the country has, they've been downgraded so many times. And we looks like many would call it, financial analysts would call it, we going into recessions, and now you've just got this downward spiral, and it is at some point going to have an effect on the people at the bottom producing our cars for us, losing jobs, and then it spirals up to the top again, where the consumers would then pay more for their cars because there's less cars being produced.
Well, that's very true what you're saying. If we look at the present sales market year on year, it's down approximately 29, 30%. So there are a couple of manufacturers that have done a little bit better. Suzuki is an example. They've done extremely well over this period of time, but majority of the other manufacturers are down 30%. How long can we sustain that? How long are those manufacturers going to stay in business? If I mean, it's just like any business. If you're down 30%, are you going to be
Mm,
able to sustain? No, you're going to have to either bump up your pricing to get better profits, better margins, or you've got to retrench staff, get rid of staff. So, these things affect us all across the whole country. And if you consider that our public transport system is basically non-existent unless you want to jump into a taxi, which is, as we know, is life-threatening to get into those vehicles. There's no real affordable option for people.
mm,
So, and we all as South Africans love our cars. We can't afford them anymore. So the second-hand car market is not doing as bad as the new car market because people are looking at more affordable vehicles. You don't have to pay the
mm,
CO2 taxes on used cars. It's taken as depreciation. Dealers are looking to try and move as many cars as possible. Maybe they're not trying to make those big margins they did before. It's just move cars, get them off the showroom, get another one in, use that money again, and so forth. And it's a tough time for the consumers because you're very lucky if you can go out and afford a new car now. I mean, is it a wise thing to go out and buy a new
mm,
car, or should you look at the used market? So these are things that really affect it, and I think the government needs to come here and sort of give us the motor industry some sort of stimulus to try and get more people into cars. Make it more affordable, cut down on their taxes, or take that tax and put it into something, put it into a better public transport system.
mm,
Do something to help the average man in the street. Because if you look around, most households you need two cars, not one, because one you can't get around. You need to
mm,
buy two cars, and that's with the price of new cars. Forget it. Go and buy a second-hand car. Or keep your car a lot longer. I suppose it brings up the point about maintenance now. If you're buying
mm.
yourself a new car, make sure these things are properly maintained, and if you look after them, you can hopefully get 10 years plus out of a good car nowadays.
Adam, you've mentioned a quite important point there. I mean, with obviously the price of cars and things like that. Do you think the price of our trusted brands and the brands that people would normally go to, um, obviously decline, and we've seen the increase of your Suzuki's, for that matter, like you said, your Mahindras and all of these non-common brands, if you want to call them that, the rise of them on the roads and in the markets. Do you think this plays an important role in it?
Definitely, because people are downsizing. So, if we look at people who used to drive 7 Series BMWs are driving now a 3
Mm,
Series BMW. The guy that drove a 3 Series BMW used to is now maybe driving a Corolla. The guy drives a Corolla now, can't afford a Corolla. He's buying himself a Suzuki Swift. Those are the kinds of things. And you also mentioned companies like Mahindra that are also doing well. So people are looking at more affordable options. But
mm,
you're really getting a lot of entry level cars in there. Gone are the days where you can affordably buy yourself a decent car. I mean, many people say to me, "Oh, I used to get myself a new E Class Merc every 2 or 3 years. Now I have to buy an A Class because it's so expensive." And that's true. I mean, if you go back 20 years and you look at the price of cars, I mean, the most expensive car 20 years ago in 1990 was most probably around about 250, 300 grand. Now it's what sky's the limit. It's crazy. I mean, it's really nuts. I mean, big
look,
SUVs now well over $1 million for most of them.
mm. And it's
Bucky's
quite
also, yeah,
yeah, I mean, Bucky, you see the rise in Buckies and people wanting to have Buckies, obviously moving from SUVs now to Buckies. Um, it's it's a bit shocking. I mean, is there any tactics for South Africans to go about buying their cars in order to avoid this loopholes and all of these tax binding, let's say, payments that you need to make? What is the way out of this or around it in order for South Africans to beat this so that it can still be easy on their pockets? However, they're still getting that content and peace of mind by getting the cars that they want.
obviously, like I mentioned earlier about finance, the finance companies are coming up with innovative ways in which people can afford more cars. Although what it does really is it makes you pay for the car for a lot longer. Um, so that's one way, I suppose, of getting people into new cars. But it's a difficult thing because the manufacturers can't just bring the price of cars down. It costs them a lot of money to
Mm,
bring them in. If you suddenly bring down the price of cars, you are going to affect the resale values of the used ones, which is a problem. So you see also uh, innovative things from the manufacturers where they'll say an extra 50,000 Rand trade assistance. So if your car's worth 100 grand, they're going to give you 150,000 Rand for it. And why do they do that? Because they could give you 50,000 Rand off the car that you're going to buy, but it affects then the second-hand
mm,
price in the market in the second-hand cars. So if they've got one for, let's say it's 350,000 Rand, you trade your car in, they're going to give you extra 50 grand on it. Maybe there's a second-hand one on their showroom floor for 320. They can't really do that because otherwise it looks like it's better option to go and buy the second-hand one than the new one. So there's innovative ways for them the manufacturers to do that. But the manufacturers are going to be bleeding a lot of money out because they're incentivizing things to try and get their metal out the factory and onto the roads.
mm. Well, it's quite an interesting one, and I think a topic like this would take so much time to discuss. I mean, in depth, the different factors that obviously play a role in affecting the final price of the cars. I mean, the consumers, the approach to buying new cars, obviously, with the prices being this high. I mean, Adam, it's now 2021. Everybody's looking to start this year off on a better foot than they ended last year, with everybody being in lockdown. Nobody could hardly do anything.
No.
Um, Come 2021, any new releases that we can look forward to that's going to be easy on the pocket?
No, they're all going to be heavy on our pocket. That is the problem. But I think the way forward, as you and I both mentioned during this interview, that companies like Mahindra, like Suzuki, you're going to find, I think, a lot more people downsizing to if they want a new car. Because some people are specific. I want a new car. That's fine. But instead of them being able to buy their top of the range luxury vehicle they want to buy, they're going to be now downgrading to something. And we can see it in the sales figures. If you look at the sales figures, when you go back 10 years ago, BMW and Mercedes and Audi as well, they were selling 1,000 plus 3 Series C classes a month. Those numbers are nowhere near there. They're selling, in the couple of hundred, maybe if they're lucky. So as we can see from the sales figures, you'll see that people are downsizing to a lot more affordable cars. And then, we can also talk about things like electric cars. Oh, we want to move on to this electric cars, better for the environment. But government, again, here, haven't reclassified electric cars as and giving them incentives. Like a lot of European and American countries, what they'll do is they're giving an incentive to use an electric car because it's better for the environment and so forth. They're not doing that here. It's still, as I understand it, it's still classified as a leisure vehicle, so it gets into the same category as something like a golf cart. So a golf cart, they classify.
Mm.
So it's got, I think the duties on that are in the region of about 35%, somewhere around there, just for the import duties, excluding all the other stuff. So then you see cars like the Jaguar I-Pace, which was last year's South African Guild of Motoring Journalists Car of the Year. 1.8, 1.9 million rand for an electric car. How many have they sold? I don't know. Maybe one or two. If you look at the i3 BMW, 700 odd thousand rand. You can buy it for the same sort of money. You can have change from a 320 diesel. What are you going to buy? You're going to go buy a 320D. You're not going to buy an i3.
Mm.
We've got the Nissan Leaf, which we see occasionally. Electric cars is another story. They're going to come out here, and unless government puts some sort of incentive in, and they're never going to sell, big numbers of them. They're going to sell small numbers. It's not going to be like in Norway where 56% of the cars are electric. Why? Because the government is incentivizing people to use it because they've got a long-term vision, as opposed to our guys, which are looking for, let's see how much money we can get out of the public or tax companies so that they can do whatever they want with it.
Well, I don't think it would be your wisest choice in South Africa to get an electric car with load shedding.
Load
Currently.
shedding is not the problem because most cars you're going to plug into your plug point overnight, and if the power goes off for a couple of hours, you wake up, it's fine. I think in terms of electric cars, we're driving greater distances than lots of people do around the world. So if you lived in the UK as an example, your average drive a day, commute to days was probably less than 10 Ks. So it's fine, you can do that. But here we get people driving from Pretoria to Johannesburg, Johannesburg to Pretoria, Vereeniging, and they work in Sandton, so people drive a lot more. And with vehicle ranges only in the region of about 300 on average, and the price of the vehicle, are we going to get those cars? But are they buying them? No. And there is the infrastructure to drive it from Johannesburg to Cape Town, from Joburg to Durban, from Johannesburg to East London and PE. I think there's all these power points that have been put up there for electric cars. But the problem is now you say, okay, well, I want to go to Durban for the weekend in my BMW i3 as an example. And you go, oh, I'm going to fill up at Harrismith. I'm going to plug it in at Harrismith to get there. There's only 2 charging points there. And you get there and there's 2 plugged in already and another 2 waiting. You might as well find yourself a hotel because you're only going to leave tomorrow. That's the problem, That's the problem. And it's 700 odd thousand rand for the cheapest electric car. I think the Mini now, there is a Mini that's just come out that's electric, and I think that one is also around the sort of 600,000-700,000 rand. So electric cars for us, I think we're not going to be seeing them for many, many, many years to come in mass. I'd be surprised if we in the next 10 years get up to 10% of the car park electric cars.
Look, it's quite interesting to see how the world is developing and evolving. However, back home in South Africa, we're still stuck and struggling to keep up with the pace that the rest of the world is going at. Electric cars is a trend around the world. South Africa, we're obviously still struggling. But Adam, we've got so much to chat about. I'm looking forward to chatting to you very, very soon on our next chat. Thank you so much for your time this evening, explaining exactly why cars are so expensive in South Africa. I think you've answered a lot of questions for many consumers around the country, and I'm sure after the advice you've given them, they will rethink the way they go about purchasing their new cars.
Good. Thanks for the chat. I hope everybody enjoyed our little chat this evening.
No, it was very, very informative. Thank you so much. That was Adam
Pleasure.
Ford, Salam Media's favorite motoring journalist, telling us exactly why cars are so expensive in South Africa, touching on the importance of the taxes that's currently happening, that's charged on our cars. All the different factors that contribute to why our cars are so expensive. If you've missed the segment, it will be up on Salam Media's Facebook page and the rest of the social media platforms. If you've missed any of the segments this evening, we had an informative chat with Salam Media's own producer, Salilo Makwantiri, who told us exactly what is happening in the footballing world. Pitso Mosemani ending third in the Club World Cup. Telling us about Percy Tau as well. Then we were chatting to Suleiman Moden, telling us about the cricket, what South Africa is currently undergoing in Pakistan, and what they can expect when they come home, when they prepare for the return leg of that series. Rabbi Albertine, the sports biokineticist, telling us exactly how we will return to play and the measures that you have to take so that you can avoid injury, especially for amateur athletes in South Africa that have been out of action for almost over a year. So, yep, it's been an interesting evening. That's it from myself, Dhakir Dawood. Thank you so much for everybody who tuned in. I hope that the content was interesting, informative, and you left the show this evening having been educated and well entertained. Well, that's it from myself and the team at Salam Media. Thank you so much for everybody who listened, tuned in, live streamed on the various platforms. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.